please do promote everyone who is in the room to a panelist, because this is a workshop and I fully intend for everybody to participate here if you would like to, of course. This is not a webinar. So, and I will make that point once again.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Claudia. So hold on just a second. I realized my connection is not in my PC, my Mac. There we go. Now you should all be able to hear me a lot better. So wonderful. So if there's no further ado, I'd like to get started. Welcome everyone to our workshop, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Michael Ogia, and in the context of this session, the hat that I'm wearing is that of a steering committee member of the Internet Rights and Principles Coalition, one of the IGF's 23 active dynamic coalitions. The IRPC has been prioritizing this subject since 2018, in line with Article 4 of our charter regarding the right to development. This session seeks to build on events in Paris in 2018, as well as Berlin last year, and others, where we have demonstrated how internet governance, environmental sustainability, and human rights are interconnected. This workshop also builds on our DC session held on 6 November this year, so about 10 days ago, along with a session that the Association for Progressive Communications held last week. So why this topic now? The urgency surrounding this area now has never been greater. Internet-dependent technologies are an integral part of our daily lives, and even more so considering the pandemic. Yet ICTs have a direct, information and communications technologies, have a direct impact on the physical environment, locally, regionally, and internationally. While these technologies play an increasingly central role in global efforts to find solutions to tackle the climate crisis and promote both environmental protection as well as sustainable development, the growing demands of an internet-dependent and interconnected society are contributing to unprecedented levels of energy consumption, conflict mineral mining, e-waste generation, and the subsequent dumping in the global south, as well as negative effects on vulnerable natural landscapes, communities, human rights, and much more. One of our principal arguments is that many of these problems rather, stem from a lack of consideration of sustainability in the design of ICTs. We now face a situation where we need to create sustainable technology for tomorrow, but are still working with the unsustainable business models, lack of long-term holistic design thinking, and inadequate policy frameworks that have essentially defined technology, ICTs, for the past 20 to 30 years, if not longer. This is further exacerbated by the siloed nature of communities, discussions, networks, and solutions that are seeking to address the topic. Many organizations, researchers, governments, and companies, and many more, are working to address some aspect of technological sustainability, which is great. However, they often do not communicate across sectoral partitions, and worse, they often don't know others working on the topic even exist. They don't know that others are out there working on the same topic. Now, a lack of a holistic approach to this topic is problematic for myriad reasons, not least because of three critical elements. One, there is concern that there are so many piecemeal approaches to the topic that the overall impact will actually be limited due to no clear consensus as to how to move forward or measure progress as it relates to the sector as a whole. Number two, and closely connected to this, is that the extremely limited funding and resources that are available, that is needed to drive change, will not be adequate to realize our goals, especially if it's spread across and not necessarily coordinated, or in a way that is not being accessed in a bit more equitable way. And then three, this IGF has actually underscored how the scope of our work is incredibly important. While I've already recognized two aspects in my earlier comments, the two being ICTs for sustainable development and sustainable digitization, along with two, the sustainability of ICTs themselves from their production and consumption and their underlying infrastructure. Those are two key points within the scope. But this topic also broadly includes the importance of 3, data, such as climate and environmental data to track progress, data for life cycle assessments, and the availability of public data sets. So that's a third aspect. Then, of course, there's 4, the sustainability of ICT organizational operations, like carbon neutrality efforts, sustainable procurement. All of that is important, but it's still within its own subsection of this broader topic. And then, of course, 5, there's sustainable web design. All of these things often get kind of, conflated is the right word. They get conflated with each other. So being clear about our scope is fundamental to community building, communicating effectively, especially among various organizations and stakeholder groups, and of course, measuring our own progress. This is why concerted multi-stakeholder efforts that are cross-sectoral are vital if we are to transition from insufficient retroactive fixes to more permanent, sustainable, and holistic solutions, ones that protect communities, the planet, and even bottom lines, as well as translate policy recommendations into on-the-ground action. So just quickly, before we get into the speaker introductions, I just want to stress the objectives of the session. I want to emphasize that much of the logic behind this session and our advocacy at the RRPC for the entire environment track is that many conversations are happening, but mainly in a siloed and not multi-stakeholder way. We want to highlight the interconnection between the internet, sustainability, the SDGs, and human rights, and how we can ensure that sustainability is fully integrated into the design, manufacturing, implementation, and procurement of internet-dependent technologies, from raw materials to data storage and energy consumption, all the way to disposal at the end of hardware life cycles. How can we also want to address broadly, not necessarily just in this session, but in general, generate substantive recommendations for how to break out of our siloed approach to ICT sustainability, and use the IGF and also the national and regional initiatives, the NRIs, to create space for cross-sectoral dialogue, best practice compilation, and of course, multi-stakeholder policy solutions. And then above all, and I've already said this, but I want to stress it once again. Above all, though, we want to have a frank and honest discussion. This is not a webinar. This is an IGF workshop. We are not here to simply agree with each other. We encourage dissent and challenging of ideas, especially since we consider this session to be an idea lab of sorts, like a laboratory where stakeholders from across the community and external sectors can come together and address this topic holistically, which is a critical component that I've said is often missing from the conversation. So having said all of that, I would just like to quickly very just mention how we are trying to drive this conversation. The speakers will introduce themselves, but I'm very happy to say that joining us, who will especially address the environmental activism and youth components of this topic, is Weronika Korolewska, who is joining us from Poland. To offer a government perspective, or kind of like an intergovernmental approach, we have, as well as an activist approach, we have Alexander Lutz, who is joining from Belgium. Then it is really a great honor that we have Pia Wiche, who's joining us from civil society, from the private sector, as well as the life cycle assessment community. She's joining from Chile. And hopefully soon enough, I don't see him on the call yet, but hopefully joining us will be YZ Yao from who's based in Nigeria, working on community approaches. So with that said, I would like to go ahead and open the floor to our panelists, rather our key participants. For the first round of interventions, you all have 5 minutes. And I think, Veronica, if it's okay, we can start with you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for this introduction. I'm Weronika Korolewska, and I'm an environmental activist, trainer, educational program designer, youth worker, and also a vice president of Agropermalab Foundation, which is an environmental NGO from Poland. And well, While designing this panel, we thought about one of the guiding questions to be how we can drive the action. And I actually thought that it will be useful to rephrase this question, because we know that all the knowledge and skills are already there. During all the IGF environmental sessions, in tons of publications and research and recommendations, we've heard that the solutions are already there, and they are here on all the levels: user equipment, data centers, network. We have indicators based on life cycle assessment, ideas of circular economy, ideas for obligatory open repair environment. We even have knowledge and skills of how to write a program, code, and framework so the software works more efficiently. It's really amazing how much knowledge and skills we as a community already have. So then the question is, why is the action not taking place? Why is it not happening? So in my opinion, the reason why we get stuck with all these skills and knowledge.
Oi, tesourinho. A véia não tá brincando com você?
Sorry, yeah. Well, why we get stuck in this process of pushing for change is that there is a third ingredient missing, third element, which are values and culture shift. I believe we are avoiding an honest discussion about values, and I see three critical elements in this area, in my opinion. The first element is many times we are solving, instead of solving problems, we are kind of masking them. And I think we should face the fact that everything comes at a price. And each of the stakeholder group needs to face this question. We as a society, we need to think, what kind of environmental price are we willing to pay for implementing which technologies? For example, probably business would lose part of the profit. The government would lose, and the economy would lose part of the GDP, and maybe would need to shift from the growth paradigm to the degrowth paradigm. Maybe the consumers will lose some of the comfort, but we need to have the honest conversation about what are our values. The second critical element that I see in the sphere of values is, I would say, ethics instead of compulsion. In my opinion, as a civilization, we have this compulsion to just go for the new thing instead of first cautiously research it. Okay, is it environmentally okay? So we have this compulsion to create new things instead of being a bit more cautious of what our impact on the environment is. And the third element that I see in this area of values and culture shift that is needed is that we need to tackle the problem of diffusion of responsibility. I see that in our conversations, many times all the different stakeholders are pointing fingers on each other. So the government would say that this is the business fault. The business would say, yeah, but the consumers want it. And the consumers would say, yeah, but the government allows it and the business produces it. So the diffusion of responsibility and lack of accountability is a big problem. So with that said, I give the floor to the other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Veronica. Thank you for being right on time. That was perfect. And with that, we're actually going to now move to Alexandra. Are you ready to give your first intervention?
I will think so. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you so much for all what you said, Veronica. I think that's really shows that the conversation is going to be great. So yeah, also on my side, so I work at the European Parliament for French Green MEP, more specifically on those questions on sustainable digital sustainability. It was the other way around, and also circular economy and other things. And so what we can say from our perspective is we really take it seriously, the role as a regulator. Basically, the point, I think someone gave me this image the other day, and I really liked it. It was this idea of if you have 3 foxes in a market of chickens, are the chickens really free? it was a bit to say, well, right now we have the rules in place, and the rules need to really thrive, like make the good things happen a bit by design. So if you have rules in place that bring, I would say, well, push bad behavior in the first place, then people who are trying to do the best are not going to be able to do it really well. So I think what I really like what you said, Veronica, is we have to ask ourselves what values we actually want to put at the center of our actions daily, and also of our rules. So what are our priorities? If today the priority is to make good bottom lines and to have, well, to make more products, to make profits, etc., I guess we're being on the good track. If we have other values today, namely being sustainable, being just, fair, to ensure also, well, that inequalities are not rising, etc., we need to rethink a bit the rules. So the point is just to say, okay, how do we ensure that those rules are really embedded in the market currently? So on our work right now, it's like not to say, well, we have to make so many rules that no one understands them, but more we have to make sure that it's easy to do the right thing, and that you don't have to spend, well, years or days to just either consume in the right way or to design products in the right way. So I think today what we are mostly lacking is to have also like clear information on how to do better. So I think on one side you have businesses who maybe want to do more similar practices, but then it's not necessarily the easy thing today to find those practices, because the questions have not been asked. There is not like a central way of saying, okay, I'm on the good track. You have many ways of analyzing how sustainable digital practices, digital technologies are. So that's really something I liked in your intervention as well, Mike, saying that we had also to take into account, for example, data. If you have not an harmonized data sets, and if you don't know, well, what is environmental impact? Do we agree on it? Is it harmonized, etc.? What do we take into account? Is it just energy consumption? Is it also the material part? Is it also the impact on biodiversity, etc.? Then we are asking different questions. So I'd say it's a really good thing that this conversation is happening today. There's like a real track on it this time, and many conversations had really the chance to happen already. So this is a conversation we need to continue to really get all the people around the table, and to be able to say, okay, what are our priorities? How do we achieve them? What should each stakeholder group also do to go in that direction? And how can we ensure that the rules make things easy to be sustainable by design in the future? I'll stop here for the introduction and give back the floor to you.
Thank you, Alexander. That was brilliant, and thank you so much for that, and for that really interesting perspective that we will definitely get into in the discussion. Now, let's go ahead and move to Pia, and it is really my honor, my pleasure to have her here. This is her first IGF, so like really inviting a newbie. So this is wonderful. Pia, please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Veronica and Alexandra for such great, for setting the theme. And I'm going to add a third element to this discussion, and that's data. And in the ICT sector, we work with data a lot. That's pretty much what's driving the energy consumption. It's where we store it, how we manage it, and what we do with it. And I work in a special type of data, and that's life cycle data. I've been an environmental sustainability expert for over a decade now, and I've helped pretty much everyone from individuals to countries to become more sustainable. And now I have the pleasure of chipping into this conversation and perhaps helping this community become more sustainable as well. I would like to share just a couple of slides so that you can see what is going on from the life cycle perspective. And I hope that you can see that in full screen. Is that good? Fantastic.
Yep, looks great. Thank you.
So here's my iPad. I've had it since 2010, and I cannot use it anymore because the apps are not being updated for that. So there it is, a wonderful piece of equipment that is completely dead, although it still turns on. And here is, and don't make fun of me, but I actually had one of the Windows Nokias, and I loved it. I didn't even have apps for that. I didn't care because it worked so well. And suddenly it fell to the ground, broke the glass, and I couldn't fix it because we didn't have technical service in Chile to fix that type of phone. In fact, it got discontinued. So these things were killed by design, and I still have them because they're great examples of what different parts of this sector can play. It's both hardware and software. If you're talking about a battery, you have the chemical content of the battery, which is undoubtedly going to cause environmental impacts, but you also have the management chip. How many of us have not saved a phone just by resetting it because the battery was dying quickly, and then just reset the phone to factory settings and it starts working again? And that's just simply crazy. We have the wafer. You can have the instruction. We have the, that's not the wafer, that's the processor, CPU. So you have the instruction set for the CPU, how it works, and then you have the wafer on top of which it's mounted. Both things impact the environment in different ways. It actually defines how you're going to be using this equipment. We have the hard drive, and you can choose how to use that hard drive, whether you can actually design it to live for longer, and you can design it with better materials so that it lives for longer. Same thing with the software design. I just talked about my iPad not working because of software. And even the keyboard, the way that the type of plastic that you use for the keyboard and the way that you control the keyboard also make changes on how, for how long it's going to be used. And that's the key word here, how long. The longer that we use a material, the better it is for the environment. That's undoubtable. But we also have, there's a lot of things going on around recycling in the ICT sector, and that's fantastic because we have this data, which is fun. It's great. I mean, it's literally a gold mine to have electronic waste. And recycling is cool, but it's just not enough, because if we keep generating, we keep generating garbage, basically, we're gonna continue generating environmental impacts over and over again. So we actually, what from the life cycle perspective would be even better than recycling is to actually change the business model around ICT so that we can make things last for longer and change the way we make money out of the sector, basically. Veronica said a few minutes ago that the solutions are already there, and we know it. This is why this week we're launching GreenUp. It's our web-based app. And that's so amazing because it's going to be on the cloud, and we're in an ICT group. So we have technology saving technology, because the solutions are already there, but they're all scattered. So when you're starting to take a hold of the power that you have as a decision maker anywhere you are in this value chain, you're going to need examples, you're going to need success stories to implement into your design so that things can last for longer, so that things can lend a better service throughout their lifetime. And we are putting all of those solutions in GreenUp. And if you want to have access to the tool, just follow that QR code, sign up, and as soon as it gets launched, you're going to have access to that. So basically, my contribution to this conversation is going to be, how do we use data to define what's most important to look at in the beginning so that we can tackle that 20% of issues that are generating 80% of the environmental impacts, and that we can ultimately have a sustainable planet to live on. Back to you, Michael.
That was brilliant, Pia, and thank you so much for this. Just I think GreenUp, you said, is in Spanish at the moment, but which is fine as well, because it's just another reminder that it's good to connect with communities that are not necessarily just primarily English speaking. So thank you so much, Pia, and we will come back to so many of the good things that you just talked about. Our last official intervention is going to be given by YZ Yao, and I think YZ, have you joined? I see you here, or at least you were here. Can you speak, YZ?
Thank you very much, Mike. Great. Okay, you can hear me. Good afternoon, good morning, good whatever time it is for individuals. Like Pierre, I'm going to add another element to the equation, which is to look at the agency of individuals for change, whether collectively or so. But if we want to change society, if we want to change the way things are done, then that agency in us is actually a critical factor. Now, every device that we see are actually products of specific ideas, shaped by ideologies and so forth. And what we see now is that most digital tools are actually designed specifically to maximize profit, which are little interest in the consequences that they produce. And of course, we do know that often they have negative consequences on the people. We consume bandwidth, we consume energy and so forth. We produce e-waste, and that creates problem for the sustainability of the environment. But people are not just robots. They are mobilizing this own agency to respond to crises that they find themselves in. And I think that within the context that I live in Nigeria, I see 3 specific responses by communities to the way in which technology is inserted within its own communities. One is irrespective of the use of energy.
YZ, you got cut off there for a second. Can you hear us? Sorry everyone, his connection is kind of tends to come in and out. So, you know, just a good reminder too that we're not all on we might all be in the same boat, but not in the same sea.
Yeah, okay.
Here we go.
Just like the connectivity, energy is extremely low supply in most developing countries, and therefore people need to fill these the ICT tools using generators, and of course that means diesel-based, gas-based, and we know that is polluting the environment. And so what I see of recent is that communities are responding and moving away from the diesel-based energy sources to solar-based solutions. And within that, you see different models in either as cooperatives within communities or either an individual set up one central place where a number of consumers come and make use of that. So that's one response to the crisis that energy is creating in our community. The second is about the increasing presence of waste generally, but particularly also e-waste. People are responding to it by now moving a large movement around recycling and collection and recycling of waste. This recycling is not done specifically from the perspective of circular economy, but from different perspectives. One, for instance, being driven by the UN campaign on sustainability of the environment. Another is the fact that people see recycling as an economic activity and so forth. So there's that growing response, which is helping to clear up the environment, but also helping to lay a foundation for circular economic embracement within the society. The third response for me is about the repair and reuse movement that is growing up in Nigeria. Right now, there are over 8,000 people that are within the movement that are working, repairing GSM, handsets, computers, and so forth. Government itself has mainstreamed this by incorporating the training on repairs into the secondary school curriculum. Again, as with the previous response, this is not an embrace of circular economy. It's simply that there is an opportunity and people are cashing in. And so this element for me illustrates first the fact that inherent in the response of the people, we can see elements of circular economy that is coming up, and they will provide a foundation for a national capacity for the embrace of economy. But more importantly for me, that illustrates that people are not just consuming technology, but also are responding in a way that they think they can overcome some of the problems that they emerge. Thank you very much, Mike. Over to you.
Hold on. Thank you so much, YZ, also for everybody who's on time, and I really appreciate that. And so what I would like to do now, those were fantastic opening statements. There is so much, so much to get there. I would like to go, I have a couple questions myself, and just a reminder to anyone who's not speaking to please just mute yourself so there's no noise. I have a few questions. There's clearly some of the things that you all mentioned. Almost everybody mentioned to some degree an element of the business models. So clearly the economics has to be part of this conversation in one way or another. Regulation came up quite a bit. People, like obviously Pia and YZ also discussed the circular economy. And whenever we talk about life cycle assessment, if anybody's not familiar, that is one of the primary tools used by the circular economy. So there's a very clear overlap there. Does anyone have, for this round, does anybody have any opening questions that they would like to get? Just any clarification, anything that struck you as interesting that you would like to ask about? And also, this also extends to the panelists themselves. If any of you, key speakers, if any of you would like to highlight or mention anything that you all have spoken about as well. And feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to. You can write hand in the chat. That works as well. Oh, hey, YZ, good to see you. Yeah, so please, if anybody has any questions, let us know. Otherwise, I will go into all of mine, and I'm fairly certain that you don't want to just hear me speak for an hour and a half. I promise this has to be the most civil and less rambunctious IGF that I've ever been to. You know?
Michael?
Yes.
I see a question from Mohammed Atif Alim. Hi, there are many viable approaches in terms of recycling e-waste. Still, a lot of emphasis is given to the lifestyle aspect of using it. So do you think in future more innovative ways will evolve to tackle e-waste? So maybe because YZ was speaking about it, maybe you want to go first, YZ?
Okay, thank you very much. I think that we haven't come to the end of history in terms of ideas and technology. And so it's pretty straightforward to say that more innovative ways would evolve as we move around. I think that it's very clear that more needs to be done, even in terms of the extraction, the retrieval of the materials from the waste, that the efficiency can improve. We could have ways that reduce energy consumptions, and you could have ways that are much more cleaner in terms of handling of the products of recycling, which is the harmful waste. You know, so I'm optimistic and confident that we will have more innovative ways in the future to tackle e-waste. That is provided that profit is not just a central motive driving the technology, but that people would be at the center of it. Thank you.
Thank you, YZ, and that really just. Oh, great! There's Daphne Stevens has a question. Go ahead, Daphne. Please unmute yourself and go ahead and just introduce yourself.
All right, thank you so much. Well, my name is Daphne. I'm from the Netherlands, and I'm one of the IGF Youth Ambassadors of this year, with Michael as my mentor. So, hi, Michael. Anyways, I was wondering, how can we start that culture shift? Because I have a conversation with so many people about we need to be more environmental friendly and also with regards to ICT and everything. But it's always just like 1 year in and 1 year out. So like, how can we actually establish such a culture shift? I think it's a really big question, but it's a very important question to ask as well. So thank you.
Go ahead, Pia, if you'd like to take that.
Yeah, I'd like to mix it also with the previous question, because I see that a lot of people are tackling their desire to become more sustainable from a recycling perspective, from a zero waste perspective, and I think that's the kind of the last place we should be looking at, which is our waste. A more powerful way to look at sustainability is to look at our consumption patterns and things that we can do right away to change dramatically our impact on the planet is, first of all, consume everything we have. Our homes are filled with things that have been stored there forever. So your first challenge that I have set for myself and that I set for others is, okay, so finish up everything you have. And that also comes to technology. So use it until it's gone. Use it until it's broken. And this connects very nicely to the previous question, because a more innovative way to tackle e-waste is to actually think on the way that we produce that waste, that we produce the materials. And modularization, I'm thinking things like the Fairphone, for instance, are really helpful because it helps you to easily change just the part of the device that is not working anymore. And that could severely reduce the impacts of the device we use.
Thank you, Pia. Would anybody like to comment as well, or anybody in the chat? Feel free to speak up. Otherwise, I also have a couple questions that I would like to ask based on these first round of introduction of ones. So go ahead, please, Alex.
A small addition there. I think that's great questions also to start with. Well, for the on the culture shift, obviously it's not something that happens overnight, but that's why usually what I think is that people ask how to be more sustainable. The thing is, sustainability, it's not just something made of, well, unrelated actions that are sporadic here and there. It's not just some things on the side. It's, well, it has to be like the main focus and to be really the aim at the end. That's why, for example, in terms of economics, if you have just this idea of saying, hey, we need to see the English is spelling me, PIB, in English, how much the PIB, maybe you know it from the Spanish as well. I'll go, let's switch to something else, doesn't matter. So if the point is just to make more profits and to see how much products and services are there every time, it's just going to be that's the aim, and then some stuff at the end on the side. If we're saying, okay, maybe the point is to see how much, what we can do so that everyone has enough, and what we can't do, like the planetary boundaries, we can't go beyond without endangering our, well, way of life, our planet, and us with it. Then it becomes a different conversation. So how do we achieve that? I do think that changing the law and also the things that guide our actions is really important. If you say that sustainability is a core value, or that justice is a core value, then it becomes something else. And I think that's something that's being done more and more. In terms of very concrete things we can do, it's like basically product design. If we say, okay, you cannot use a material that has this and this kind of impact environmentally, and we can measure it, then it also changes the conversation. For now, it's like just some impacts on the side that we don't take into account in the price, for example, or even in terms of being able to sell it or to advertise for it. So we can change this, and then it becomes something else. And I do think that people are ready for this cultural shift because it becomes a marketing argument today to be sustainable. So there's really an avenue to go there. And in this other question of e-waste, also thank you, Mohammed, for this one. I think it's a bit the same. First, we have to, when we design a product, to be able to think about the end of life during the design phase. So that's it, as Pia just said, that you can just easily dismantle it at the end. And for now, again, it's easier and cheaper to mine new material than to use the previous one, or to even think of having long and durable product. So that's also incentives we can give.
Thank you, Alex. And YZ, do you mind just muting yourself if you're not speaking, just because it picks up some back? Thank you. Veronica, can we come to you? Can you try to keep it like to maybe minute and a half, just because we have one more question before we move on to our next round of interventions?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to comment on these two questions. So about the recycling versus focusing on durability, I have noticed, and I think it's a common experience, that the possibility of recycling paradoxically gives a false sense of security and lack of responsibility, because it's like, okay, if I recycle it, my hands are clean and that's it. But that's not the issue, because first, the devices are not fully recyclable. Usually the highest percentage we can get is probably 70-80%. And then the energy that was used to produce it is the other thing. And about the question about the culture shift, well, we are part of culture. We created the culture every day through our activity, public activity. So yeah, I will just mention it now quickly, because later I will come back to this point.
Thank you, Veronica. And just one thing to mention is that as much as we emphasize the need for engineers and manufacturers and miners to be involved in all this, so should the marketing departments, because that is a big part of setting the culture, setting the expectations, talking about values. A lot of that is reflected in the marketing practices that underpin the business model. So that's just something to keep in mind. Leonard, you have your hand up. Can we go ahead and come to you before we close this round of intervention?
Sure, thanks, Michael. I try to keep it concise in the interest of time. Actually, I want to build on the culture discussion, but just as introduction, I'm also one of the Internet Society youth ambassadors this year, and also myself working with a major IT company. So I have like two hats in this discussion, and I think that's why I'm also asking the point that I'm going to raise now, which is I think a key issue with the culture debate is like the overall perception of sustainability as a problem, right? Because I still see that in day-to-day discussion, it's perceived as a luxury problem. So usually people which are like in a Eurocentric context mainly have like the ability to discuss these issues because they are not such fundamental problems as in other parts of the world, right? And then within that area of sustainability, the field of digital sustainability is like even smaller and even like more backing in terms of seeing the severity of the problem. So my question is, taking into account that indeed there are other as crucial problems in the world, such as half the world's population lacking access to internet, how can we convey the urgency of the problem of digital sustainability without coming off like too from above, so to say? I think that could be a major issue to address. Thank you.
I'd like to start by saying that the sustainability market has developed as a luxury market because people are willing to pay more to do better. And that's just Cialdini, that's just sales. But that's not something that I agree with. I don't agree with sustainable things being more expensive. Absolutely not, because then they're never gonna go mainstream, and then we're never gonna tackle the actual problem. But also going deeper into your question, sustainability is not a luxury problem, it's actually a need. And it's even more a need for those countries that are not as advanced as Europe, because they have structural issues. I will tackle the issue of food, for instance. We think about organic when we think about sustainable, but in fact, it's not just about being organic, it's about a sustainable production system in food would be one that does not make people sick, that provides enough nutrients, and that looks after the environment. And that, of course, makes money for the farmer. But the way that we have developed our food systems is not really going in that direction. So sustainability is a need, especially for those agricultural-based economies that are currently sick, poor, and malnutritioned. So just to change your mindset, that's what I wanted to add. Please, the other panelists, you may go on.
Does anybody have anything to add? If not, I see that Shauna has her hand up. And Shauna, I did say that we're going to close this round for introductions at the moment, or sorry, for interventions at the moment. So if it's okay, just keep your hand, and once the next round is over, we'll come back to you. Okay. Does anybody have anything to add to Pia's comments about in response to Leonard's question? Oh, sorry. Thank you, Shauna. Thank you. I'm glad we have the chat. So Shauna, please unmute yourself and feel free to speak.
Thanks, Michael. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you great.
Great. Just to say, I really appreciated your question, Leonard, and it's something that's come up within APC Network. We have, for example, a member in South Africa, Zenzeleni, and they've set up a community network, a mesh network, so that they can really develop connectivity in the community. But one of the reflections that they had is that, I mean, they're so focused on really just basic human rights issues of access to clean water, access to food, employment. So issues of environmental sustainability, it's not that they're not relevant, but that they're just not as at the forefront. And so actually just this year, APC is supporting a member of ours, Computer Aid, who develops these solar learning labs, which are basically shipping containers that have been transformed with solar panels on the top and usually 8 to 10 sort of workstations inside. And they're working with Zenzeleni Network to set up a solar learning lab in the community network and really trying to understand from each other the learnings from the community connectivity models and the understanding from the setting up of the solar learning labs to really make, to understand and to make it relevant to the local community. So just to say, I think it is something that we need to look at, and not that it's a privilege to work on this, but that that there are so many other things that people are dealing with. And I think it is important that we make it relevant to the people who we're trying to be working with. Thanks.
Oh, Michael, don't hate me. I just want to add a little comment, and that's that I truly believe that technology and the internet are the solutions to these issues. We need, if we want to improve access to water, we can use technology. If we want to improve the way we're producing food, we need to use technology. And all of the other structural issues, even transparency, can be helped with big data, with the internet. So all of these issues require this group of stakeholders to take action on that and to do so in a sustainable way. So yeah, you guys are the solution.
Alex, if you have just like final thought, and then we're going to move to the second part of this discussion.
Yes, just one final thought. Just to say, I agree with what was previously said, mostly that it's always the most dispossessed people who do, who are under duress when it comes to sustainability. I'd say like it's mostly not countries from the global north that have the problems in e-waste. It's usually also not them that will have all the problems when we have competing resource usages. What we know today is we have a definite number of rare metals that are needed for the ecological transition, so mostly solar panels, etc. They're also heavily needed for all the technological devices. So if you want to do both, you have to also see where you're going to put those resources. So either maybe you're going to have some countries which will do a great like smart city everything plus ecological transition, others will have none of them. So it is also questions we have to ask ourselves. So usually no, it's not a luxury problem, and it will basically also make some people's life harder than others. And then also, yeah, on the technology need, it's also always something you have to see and to ponder to see, okay, where do we need actually technology and where do we need less? I know, for example, that some groups have said, yeah, we need technology right now to do sustainable AI and climate change. And they said, yeah, we have to use it to be more efficient in the way we do industrial agriculture. And coming also from a perspective where we have to go towards more sustainable practice in agriculture that are not industrial, not to put more pesticides, but to do none of them and to defer that. In that case, technology will not help, but maybe it would help to find new ways to do agroecology. So it depends also on how you use technology. It's not neutral.
Thank you, Alex. And I think this is, I'd like to think that this is actually a good segue into, let's say, the second part of what I really hope that this discussion can get to, which is essentially what can we do to help drive change within the current, to the current paradigm, within and among our respective communities and networks. And what I'm really trying to get to with this question is that we are all, okay, we're working on this one place, you're working on this here, I'm working on this there, but maybe we're not talking to each other. Maybe our colleagues are not talking to each other. Maybe our colleagues are not talking to people that they should be. One thing that I often find with myself is that I'll reach out to people and they struggle to understand, why am I talking to them? Why am I trying to get in touch with them? Because they don't work on ICT sustainability. Yes, but maybe they work on conflict minerals. Maybe they work on mining. Maybe they work on something else. The idea being that there is so many layers of integration within this. That's why I talk about the holistic nature of it, you know, trying to see across the board how those things are connected. So what can we do to really spur change within our networks, within our communities, and get people to talk to each other more? You know, this is, for instance, the first time that Pia, as an LCA, a life cycle assessment professional, is speaking to our community. Who do we need to reach out to, and what can we do to include them? So with that, I want to give it back to the panelists. You have, let's say, 3 to 5 minutes. If you could just make some, yeah, I know it's short, but we're good. But you have 3 to 5 minutes. If you could just try and make some key points on that particular question. Oh, and sorry, I forgot to mention, let's go through the same order that we went through. So Veronica, let's start with you.
Thanks, Michael. Well, if the question is what can we do to help change, and what can our respective communities do, I represent the civil society sector, the NGOs, and we mostly can contribute through education and awareness raising. And I believe we are in a very, very interesting point in the history now. And I want to share with you the experience of the person from the Eastern European country, from Poland. But I guess many of you, wherever you are from, maybe you can relate to this experience one way or the other, because many countries in their history went through some system change or revolutions. So at the end of the communist times in Poland, the last decade of the communist times, most of the people already knew that that system, communist system, was just ridiculous, and it had so many absurds. They would still go to all these compulsory demonstrations and scream, "Long live the Communist Party and Lenin and Stalin." But at the bottom of their hearts, they knew they already knew, and they were sure how absurd it was. And talking about the culture shift, I believe we are in exactly the same moment where we already see, no, we cannot go on like this. This is just madness, what we are doing to the environment and our consumption patterns and the solutions that we implement. And as a representative of the NGO, I cannot underestimate the value of education, and I need to advocate good holistic education of this deep ecological thinking. And I mean the education which is not about just these buzzwords like climate change, decarbonization. No, I mean really holistic education. The framework we can use can be the planetary boundaries that includes 9 factors, not only climate change, but biodiversity loss, chemical pollution, and other like 9 factors. So teaching children and youth that this is important. These children, they will become in 10 years politicians, they will become the IT designers, they will become the consumers. So by creating the good educational framework, both from the NGOs side and from the governmental sides in public schools, we really can create the lasting change. And I know that as a civilization, we are a bit impatient, like, no, it will take a long time, education, but it's crucial to invest in this general sensitivity for the environment, and for the fact that all of us as human beings should be certain, it should be obvious to us that we are part of the interconnected ecosystem, and if we kill one part of it, we will be killed ourselves too. So with that said, I can give the floor to the others because we don't have much time.
Thank you, Vera. I really appreciate that. Alex, can we go ahead and go to you?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I think it was a great example, what you just mentioned about the communist time. And when you see change happening, you know it has to happen. And so I thought it was a great inspiration. Thank you for sharing that. So yeah, how do we spark change? Well, that's 3 minutes to change the entire world system. Thank you, Michael. It's basically a question of governance. It's kind of a governance issue. Maybe we're at the right place for this, but most decisions happen in silos everywhere we are. Also thinking in terms of, well, state, government, etc. In the EU, we are all working on some specific issues, and then the question is, how do you ensure that there is like no gap kind of between them? I think the answer is there will always be some, and then you have to, well, see them and to start working on it. So the good thing is now I think the intersection of digital and sustainability has been identified as being something we need to work on. The question is now, how do we ensure that we get towards working on that? Also, it was interesting what you said, Michael, on so how you reach out to some people who don't know why you're reaching out to them. I think it just gives out a sense of a great lack of legitimacy on those questions. If you go to the people from the environment, they're like, well, we're not tech people. You go to the tech people, they say, well, we're not from the environment sector. And then you're like, well, okay, great, who's left? So a few people are, thankfully, and they're also in this call, so it's great to see so many of them. But that's why we need to have those conversations, those moments where we all talk to each other and organize this intersection to also propose concrete policy measures that we can put in place. So I think it will be great to have more moments where we concretely think, okay, what do we need in place right now in terms of policy, so that this change we see, the good examples that are set by sustainable businesses, what the NGOs are seeing, what the tech are building, how do we make this mainstream? How do we share the good practices? And I mean, they exist, so the problem is of making them visible, but also we have to be frank, some people don't want to take them on board because they're comfortable with staying the way they are. So it's also an education problem of the current generation, people who are already in power. We have like less than 10 years now to make a change in terms of climate change, so we don't have like a new generation to wait. Thankfully, the climate generation is also there and doing stuff that we see, so that's also a good thing. So yeah, I think right now we need to be sure that whenever we are dealing with a subject, we put on the different lenses that we need. I know it's the same for gender questions. Whenever you do a policy, well, you need to think, okay, what are the consequences in terms of gender? And now the question is also, well, in terms of sustainability for tech and the other way around. But yeah, I'm confident that those conversations are already happening. So now the question is bringing it up and continuing our work.
Thank you so much, Alex. And Pia, over to you.
Thanks. How do we connect such a vast network of professionals that also have their own silos? We talk about silos as institutions, but in fact, we are all in a silo, in the silo of our own mind. We all have biases, and we all have a limited amount of knowledge and wisdom and experience in our brains. And this is something that I have come to appreciate, especially in the last 2 years. I used to think that we had to learn until we knew it all and we could make all the decisions. But in fact, it's quite beautiful to have this distributed knowledge, because it forces us to work in teams. And I think that the first step is just to acknowledge that we are in a silo. Whatever we do, we are going to be in a silo. And so that already opens the door to go out and, as Alexandra said, put on different lenses and call different actors when we're making a decision. And that's very good when we're working in committees and we have to make big decisions, big strategic action that usually happens in the private sector, the public sector as well. But when we are on the day-to-day struggle of designing the next processor of looking at what screen we're going to use or what marketing materials we are designing, then it comes down to having the right people in your close proximity and knowing just a little bit, but just enough so that it will direct you in the right direction. Veronica was speaking about education, and I believe that one thing that is critical if we're going to tackle our environmental and social issues is to have a life cycle perspective. Our entire education system is built on a linear perspective, where A causes B causes C, but we have to learn how to think in networks. And I think that the people in this community are very well suited to that because you guys work with networks all the time. But we need to transfer that knowledge and that kind of the way that we do things into our everyday modus operandi, where we acknowledge the network and we build a network that is robust and that is vast enough so that it provides the information that we need. We don't need to know it all. We don't all need to be life cycle experts, but we need to know that there is a life cycle and have it in mind so that when we're designing, we can actually imagine at least a little piece of that and try to optimize for that. One thing that I think that would be very, very useful for every community is to have more life cycle assessment experts in the team. So whenever designing a new product, there should be a guy measuring what's the environmental impacts, not just of the product itself and its end of life, like its waste, but also of all of the environmental impacts that come from producing the minerals, from producing the cardboard for the box, from everything that it has to happen so that product comes to life and then dies. So having more life cycle assessment experts would be a great way to tackle those issues with data. And the other thing is to talk more. Talk more, not just within ourselves in this community, but also to the users. We, on preparing this, we talked a lot about human rights. And there's something we haven't touched very much upon yet, which is the economy. Many of us in our generation, we cannot afford a house, we cannot afford a car because everything is super expensive and we're spending whatever we make. So we're literally spending minutes of our lives and hours and days of our lives into buying things. How are we as a generation serving our peers with the design of the things that we sell them? How much of their lives are we taking with the design of the product we make? If we can make a product that lasts for longer, that is more sustainable, we are actually giving back life, minutes of life to these people who are spending their life to work to pay for the stuff that we produce. So that is a huge mind changer that I invite everyone to reflect upon, because then it opens another door. And that's the door to changing the way that we do things, to changing our business model, to changing our designs, etc. And it puts our hearts into our work and really makes us believe that and see how important our work is for the life of others, for the quality of life of other people.
That was beautiful, Pia. Thank you so much for that. Very provocative thought, actually, in general. And can we end YZ? Do you just have any? Please feel free to come in. Do you have any comments about how, especially, we can be reaching out to others, and especially in your sense, how we can be reaching out to more people within communities on the ground, maybe especially people that aren't necessarily involved in this, but are very much affected by the end result of the lack of design and the sustainability in design.
Well, thank you very much. I think that we need to have conversations.
I'm sorry, YZ. Sorry, YZ. You
conversation bringing them together.
I'm sorry, YZ. You cut out for just a second. Could I just ask you? It might be easier if you turn off your video. Yeah. Can you start again? I'm so sorry.
Okay, so I'm saying that we need to have a conversation, an inclusive conversation that brings users, communities, government, designers together to reflect on, first of all, the design principles. What is it that we want to inform the product that we design? Is it that we want to design for longevity, or is it that we are stuck to the question of doing it for shorter obsolescence, which is what characterizes moment now? We need also to drive an open architecture in the design of products, so that people could reasonably take that and repair them, just like we talked about open system, open software. We need to have systems that are designed with repairability in mind, which people could easily knock down and be able to repair. But we must also recognize that such conversations, what comes out of it is a question of power. What power do communities have in order to ensure that this perspective actually creates the day? So I think that what is most critical is what work do we do at community level, at grassroots, to ensure that the communities are able to maximize the power of these numbers, of this organizing capacity of this agency, so that when they speak totally with an effective presence of the community, that they are able to design, mobilize within the own ecosystem. Without power, whatever the discussion you do, the people who ultimately have the power will carry the day. So I think that for me, we need to think about how do community acquire, sustain, and use power to ensure that their own perspectives are reflected on the design of things that they will use. Thank you.
Thank you so much, YZ, and I'm really glad we were able to hear you there. And so thank you, all of you, for these wonderful, wonderful interventions. I want to open it back up to the floor now. And Panos, I know you had your hand up for quite a while. So Panos, would you like to go ahead and unmute yourself and go first?
Do you hear me?
Yes, hear you great.
Yes, so I wanted to react initially on the comment by Pia, who was very confident that we need technology. She said it very strongly that we need technology for this and for that. I think we should be very critical, questioning also how much technology we need, because technology has brought a lot of the problems we have today. And I understand that in many countries, there is too little connectivity, as we experienced before. But I think that also we in the West, we have too much, and we should collaborate. And answer to your question, how we should talk with other communities, I think we should put into the picture also the growth community in the domain of sustainability, and start discussing with other groups that are proposing solutions in agriculture, in the cities, in housing, in monetary systems. And try to see together how we can create more local lifestyles. And this is not an easy question. I don't propose to go back to the woods. I mean, we can redefine what means neighborhood and locality, because the most energy efficient form of communication is the face-to-face. So instead of making the internet greener, we can find ways to use less of it, with less data, less platforms, but still not rejected, of course. So yes, this is a point I wanted to make.
Thank you, Panos. Just very quickly, YZ, do you mind muting yourself? Once again, there's some background noise that's being picked up. Or if, Claudia, if you don't mind, could you, thank you, everyone. Yeah, I mean, Pia, would you like to take this comment question? It's very interesting.
Absolutely, and thank you, Panos, so much for that. I believe that in terms of technology, we have the same issue that we have with money and that we have with water, and that's distribution. So we have a lot of technology in places which are totally nonsensical. I'm sorry about this. Talking about technology. That are totally nonsensical. Like, I don't really need my coffee maker to be smart and just sense when I'm 15 minutes away from home to make my coffee. Like, I can totally live with brewing my own coffee when I get home. But we totally need more technology down in the fields to control the way that we are watering plants, how much fertilizer we're putting there, and when we should be harvesting the crops. So totally agree with you that we should like reduce on some areas, but I also understand that we need to add a lot in others, because ultimately what we need is to make countries, especially in the global south, to leapfrog. We really can't. We physically can't. The planet will not stand that they take the same curve that the more developed countries have taken. We need them to step from here to here in one big leap. And for that, we need technology, especially in the productive sector. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the question.
Right. It just goes to show too that smart solutions are not all created equal, and the application are obviously not equal as well. And speaking of equality, who can access, the person that can access the smart coffee maker is definitely not the same person that needs to access smart solutions for agriculture, let's say, necessarily. So I mean, we have to recognize the inherent inequality as well that exists within that paradigm. Would anybody else like to, does anybody else have a question, or would anybody like to, would any of our panelists like to respond to Panos as well? And if there are not any questions, I have a few of my own. So I really, there's a few in the Q&A as well. But I think I'm just going to go ahead then, and I want I really want to touch on this a bit more about, because many of us, well, two things I want to ask really. One are, and this is for everybody, especially including the people listening or that are attending. Are there any specific partnerships or collaborations that you could identify that are missing from your respective work? For instance, a good example of this, for instance, Pia, is that a lot of people don't know about FSLCI, and you can feel free to talk more about this. But what are some collaborations that could exist that are not currently in existence? And also, because so many of you discussed business models and whatnot, I mean, I feel like, as much as I agree with this personally, I feel like the moment that we start talking about business models, it automatically kind of turns off almost anybody that's in the private sector that's not focusing on this already. That it maybe comes off as, maybe it's not the right thing to say or whatnot. I disagree, but it's important to have, obviously, the people that are part of the private sector as part of the conversation. And so that's another big question, is how do we get more people from the private sector? And bear in mind that the private sector is not one whole thing. Fairphone is a part of the private sector just as much as Apple and Facebook are, or Samsung. So it's a good point of clarification. But how do we get companies to change their business model, or to update their business model, or to take a more sustainable approach within their business model? It's not just about limiting the packaging in a phone, which is fantastic, but it's also about other things, such as trying to stop telling people that they need a phone if they don't need one, for instance. But how do we change this? And I would love to hear anybody's comments on this. I know it's a big question, and I don't expect us to walk away with all the answers now.
I'll give it a shot then. So on all of those questions, I think today, well, there's like many actors, so you can't say, like, as you just mentioned, that there's just one solution to them all. I'd say, I think what is important in terms of business sector is to be able to help out to do the right thing easily. Right now, what I do think is that, again, we have this knowledge missing, etc. So I guess when someone comes in and they want to be more sustainable, they have to kind of jungle through the jungle of sustainable practices in ICTs, etc. So it's not very easy to find yet, I guess. So the question is, how do you make sure that people who want to find information can easily find it, so it's not something completely new that they have to do, to turn to specific people who have this specific knowledge and maybe want a lot of money for it. Some have it, some don't. So my point is saying, I think what we would need at this stage is as much information and data that we can publicly available, so that people can make those decisions easily. One solution, for example, that we are working on right now in the Parliament is to advocate for a digital sustainability index, where the idea would be, okay, so it kind of flags what is the environmental impact of digital technologies, well, through an LCA life cycle assessment, so that really you can see, okay, if I use this kind of, all my words again, computer, for example, for my employees, because it's also that, it's not just tech companies, it's all companies have technological, practices, and so they need to be sustainable too. So, okay, I want to have all those computers. How do I make sure that A, they're sustainable, two, that, they will maybe stay long in their, actually maybe that's also a solution, saying, okay, I know that my equipment has to be long and durable and to be repairable. Am I sure that this is really repairable? Is there a scoreboard to tell me how repairable it is? Should I maybe take those, and should I actually buy them? Should I lease them? So, and also when I do a website, is it sustainable? So I guess other people can talk better than me on sustainable websites, but all those things are in existence, but they're not really put forward. So usually what we try to do in those senses is that really to give sustainability criteria that will be clear to everyone. Our plan is to make it first for like public procurement, because usually that's the way we can also spark things. In Europe alone is like 16% of the GDP, which is the word I was looking for earlier. So we can make those things happen, say, okay, this is how you do it, how you do sustainable procurement, this is how you do sustainable tech. This is an index that tells you what impacts it has when you do this and that choice. And I guess it also already gives a good direction. So that would be to spark the direction. Then I also think that it should be the other side, namely saying, okay, those practices that are really bad, we should prohibit them. One of them could be premature obsolescence, saying that when you have a practice that consists in reducing the life span of an object just to see that object being reproduced like again and resold, and then it's just like a practice that is really bad for the environment, also for consumers, because no one wants that. Before you had washing machines for 30 years, now it's like 5. I think technological development should be about more than just having a smart thing or a new phone every year. And that's also those kinds of practices. Right now you have it's better if you have a new phone every year than to say, I have a phone, it will be just for like 5 or 7 or 10 new years, I'm going to give you new things differently. So all the things need to be also redirected in terms of incentives. And I think that it should be both in a good way of saying, okay, we give you a carrot for this, but also a stick for those who do practices that basically also just laminates the good efforts or those who are trying hard to innovate sustainably.
Thank you for that, Alex. And I'm very conscious of time, but if you could do that, maybe just what is the role of regulation in all of this as well? I mean, you had mentioned market regulation too, but I just feel like it would be remiss of us to end this conversation without at least addressing that within the context of this conversation.
Sure, I thought I did in some ways, but yes, basically what you can do is as a regulator, while we did in Europe, for example, there's something called the Eco-Design Directive, and that's a directive that sets out some standards that constructors have to respect when they are coming up with new products. It's mostly about electronics, but it can be in others. So that's one way of saying, okay, if your product doesn't respect those requirements, it cannot enter the EU markets. That would be one. Then also on all the unfair commercial practices, we have several in existence. It's another directive. And the one that we want to add as well would be the one on premature obsolescence. That would allow for this really clear bad practice when it's really known that you don't make the best effort to make your product really last long. It's not for every single product, but it's like when it's really clear that you could really do it better, but you're gluing the battery to your phone and just to prevent it from being repaired, then it would be like flagged as a premature obsolescence abusive practice, and then you could not do that anymore. So that's also a way to doing things. And then this sustainable digital, oh, God damn it, sustainable digital, nope, I can't do it. Digital Sustainability Index, God damn it, too many words, too long. We should have to find a better word for this. I don't know, something that's more, that's easier to say. Anyway, so that could be also a way of saying, okay, we give that all that data that will be publicly held. It means that whether you are a big firm or a really small firm and you want to innovate, you want to do stuff, you could have access to this easily and to know in what direction you go. So it's also giving access to data. And today there's this huge battle over it, saying, okay, who has access to it? There are monopolies that are getting all this data. It also has impact in how do AI, but that's not a conversation. So those are small ways in which you can actually regulate things going in the right direction.
Thank you, Alex. And I mean, we have about 5 minutes left. We can extend if we need to, and we did start a bit late, so bear in mind that, everyone. But but YZ, Pia, Veronica, just I would like to give everybody at least just a very final thought just before we conclude the session. And there are some really good questions and answers too that we didn't get to, unfortunately, and I'm sure there's some in the chat as well. But as for kind of a closing thought to all of you, I want you, if you could, to think, to kind of answer this question: are there specific partnerships or collaborations that you can identify that are missing in your work, that especially one that the internet governance community could potentially help facilitate? And along with that, potentially just one key kind of takeaway, or that you would like for people to walk away from, whether it be a policy recommendation or what is it that we can work on going forward, especially over the next year. What do you, at least what's a priority to you? If you could just answer that, let's say within 1 or 2 minutes, that would be wonderful. And Veronica, would you like to go first? Or Pia, I saw you nodding. I don't know who would like to go first.
I can.
Perfect.
Thanks. Well, as for the question about collaborations and partnerships, I know that many times when it comes to government representatives, the government officials from IT departments are visiting the IGF and other fora like this. But I think that besides the ministries of development, I think we should have collaborations with ministries of education, because implementing just really 3 pages in the student's book about the relationship of ICT and environment would be such a success. Children spend 8 hours a day at schools, 10 years or 15 years of their life, and there is not even one sentence in their student's book about it. So that could be a good partnership. And well, one takeaway, final takeaway that I would like to emphasize is that we might try not to stop being just human beings and not to, because we have a tendency to abstract, like, okay, right now I'm a politician and I take a decision. Right now I'm the marketing designer. Right now I am the IT person. But come on, we are also just human beings. So don't forget about it while making decisions, while inventing these slogans, marketing slogans that don't make any sense, while implementing the illegal practices of premature obsolescence and other stuff. Like, just don't stop being human, a decent human being with integrity and honesty. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Veronica. Alex, would you like to go? Are you free to go now, or Pia, would you like to go? Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, Pia was about to. Okay, I'll be really short there. Well, in terms of collaboration, I think that would be like also again to working really more close together between the sustainability actors and the tech actors. That's stating the obvious, but it's still in the progress and things are being done, which is great. And I really would encourage to having more and more forums about that specific issue as well, because it would really help spark the concrete solutions and also make everyone feel like legitimate in participating to this progress. The last final thought I'd love to share is something saying that, well, tech is not some inevitable force that's happening to us. Tech decisions are always political choices that are being made, and they're often not debated in our societies, at least not democratically. It's mostly behind closed doors. Things happen. It's not going anywhere. So I would really also call for having a really democratic debates and having populations being way more into this. I think that also the sustainability would come up way more when people are asked about them, because it's something people care about. So yeah, I would encourage also to having democracy basically being put back in those kinds of political decisions and decision processes.
Well said, Alex. And one thing that I forgot to mention to you earlier is that I've spoken English as a primary language for more than 30 years, and I forget words all the time. So please never apologize while I am ever moderating something for not remembering a word. It happens to me all the time. So thank you so much for this wonderful, insightful, and deep intervention. Pia, speaking of wonderful, insightful, and deep, please.
Thank you so much, Michael. I have felt so flattered throughout the entire session. Thanks. Great way to start a week. I want to tell you a story on my final remarks about good intentions and the demon. So once upon a time, there was a really sustainable company who sold remanufactured cell phones. And they are really concerned with sustainability. And this is why they're selling like used cell phones and not new cell phones. So they thought, we are going to make a next step in sustainability, and we're going to change our packaging from our very heavy cardboard box with plastic inside, and we're going to get rid of all the plastics, and we're going to use a beautifully branded cotton bag. And that company found a demon. Actually, it was Maxwell's demon, which stemmed the entire theory of information, in fact. They didn't have the information, so the demon came over and said, oh my God, you're doing this change, but did you know that your beautifully branded cotton bag to surround your remanufactured cell phone has 10 times more impact than the cardboard box that you were using before? And they totally went into shock. This is based on a very true story. And that conclusion was arrived to thanks to life cycle assessment. If anything, sustainability is not obvious. Most of the things that we think are more sustainable are in fact less sustainable when you look at them from a life cycle perspective. So whenever making design decisions, I really, really, really advise everyone to get a life cycle practitioner on board. And if it's too expensive to hire one in Europe, hire one in a developing country. Prices are cheaper there, so externalize. But get the information running to design, because that's when you have the opportunity to reduce 80–90% of the impacts that your product is going to have throughout its life. Once it's designed, once it's built, there's very little we can do. So work on design with designers, with life cycle experts, and let's change the entire structure of the industry.
Thank you so much, Pia. And last but certainly not least, so Izad, do you have any final thoughts, any places where, you know, partnerships or collaborations that you can identify are missing from this work? Feel free to comment.
Well, I see partnership in two directions. One is that much of the talk we do, government is absent on the table, and they are great influencers of what happens in society. So we need to do more collaboration with government in that sense. But second is that I think that the two movements, as the digital rights movement and the environmental justice movement, tend to operate separately. There's a lot that the digital rights movement would learn from the environmental justice movements, especially that whereas the environmental movement is deeply rooted within grassroots, the digital rights movement tends to be more elitist and it's not rooted in grassroots. So I think that we need to learn more about that. But my last point is that the ITU has been talking about promoting the circular economy. but this is representatives of governments, where governments are really doing nothing about promoting circular economy. I think that we need, in a way, to get into that terrain, push so that the government become much more serious about circular economy. In particular, I think that the IT should not just be talking about recycling, because there is a limit to recycling. You know, you recycle and the lifespan becomes shorter and shorter. So I think that they should also couple that with question of increasing the utility of products. You know, so that should be another strength of our advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Wazed. And that's just another reminder too, that it's, as much as we want to create new, or not necessarily create new, but as much as we want to push the envelope on especially issues that don't get enough oxygen, there's also a lot of existing initiatives that do require more concerted effort as well, especially as they relate to circular economy, to integrating life cycle perspective into design, etc. So I mean, I really want to leave you all with this before we go, and that is that, you know, don't despair. There are so many things that we can do, and the reason why I present this in a way that is like, who do we need to connect with? Who is out there? The fact is, there are so many people out there. I know, because I'm the one that says in the message saying, hi, I'm doing all this, and you have no idea who I am, and I want you to know me. I want you to get involved in these kinds of conversations, even if it's beyond the initial kind of impetus behind internet governance, which was literally the ones and zeros, the domain names, the whatnot. This is all relevant, because as we continue to build the internet, we need to make sure that we are integrating these design principles into it in such a way that we, even if we want to connect the next billion, we need to make sure that we can do that full stop, as well as make sure that we do that sustainably, assuming that's what the individuals who are not connected want to begin with. So there are so many things to take into account here. I have so many other questions. We could probably continue this, everyone, for about 2 to 3 hours, if not more. But I know we are way over our time. So with that, I would just like to conclude that with the following. I just want to say this session was organized with the support of my colleagues, Minda Moreira, Marianne Franklin, and June Paris, and would not have been possible without them. I also want to give special thanks to Shauna Finnegan from the Association for Progressive Communications for all of her incredible coordination work, and also affinity for collaboration. I especially want to thank YZ, Veronica, Alexandra, and Pia for agreeing to be a part of this, and also for kind of humoring me a little bit with what I'm just kind of teasing myself about, which is I was like, hey, Pia, you do LCA. I want to invite you to something that has, you know, is completely kind of off the typical path that you would normally be on. But this kind of practicing what we preach, trying to bring these voices together to have these kinds of discussions, and we need to have more. So thank you all so much for this incredible insight. I want to thank Claudia, who's been our host of this session, all of our colleagues at the IGF Secretariat who made this possible, including Anya, Luis, and Samantha. And as well, I always like to thank our captioner. I don't know if he or she can hear this now. I'm going to open the subtitle, but I don't know your name, unfortunately. So if you could just write your name so I could tell you thank you, and the tech team. Oh, Kelly, thank you very much, Kelly. And thank you very much to our tech team behind the scenes. And lastly, thank you to everyone who joined as well. We appreciate your participation, your enthusiasm for this topic. And most importantly, I want to thank all the members of the IGF community who have been so enthusiastically supporting this idea, including Henriette in the MAG. We've been trying so hard for so long to put this on the agenda, and to see that hard work validated with the success of this thematic track really means the world to me, but it's really so encouraging as well. And this conversation is only the start of something so much bigger. We look forward to working with more of you going forward, and invite you to engage with us further after the IGF as we take stock of this discussion throughout these past 2 weeks and plan the next step ahead for 2021. And in case you'd like for more information, you can reach out to me or us directly. And with that said, once again, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.